Is the single most important tool in archaeology actually broken?
Our historical timeline may be inaccurate.
Carbon dating, you see, it gives us everything we think we know about history.
But it's based on some serious assumptions that mess up everything.
Dates from ancient Britain onwards to medieval kings, but have a look at this. You see, there does appear to be a significant problem because some of the strongest arguments against it, including this study here, well, they seem, on the face of it, quite convincing.
Dates changing, evidence that critics claim gets ignored, one medieval king whose carbon date seemed to throw everything we knew into question.
And then we have examples of human remains, ancient remains, their dates changing by hundreds or even thousands of years. We have archaeologists going back to sites they visited decades ago and again changing the date. So how can we trust this whole process if yet again the dates might change sometime in the future? So are we missing something here, or does archaeology actually have an underlying problem it doesn't like to talk about? It's going to be a wet one. Now, to first understand why people distrust carbon dating, well, we need to try and understand exactly what they think they have found. So this is Robert Langdon, and he is one of a number of growing sort of critics that think archaeology has a problem.
Not necessarily that carbon dating itself doesn't work, but that archaeologists sometimes ignore dates they don't like. Langdon points to massive studies combining thousands of carbon dates, Bayesian models, probabilities, archaeologists combining evidence together.
Something we should consider? Have a look at this. Okay, so let's take, for example, a complete made-up example. We have these carbon dates that have just come in here from Woodhenge, where I am at right now. Now, which one of these dates should we take? Should we use? Should we use an average of them all? Should we use the first one, the last one, or perhaps just one that fits in with our narrative? So Robert Langdon tries to argue that in the case of where we're trying to find out when something was built, we should privilege what he calls the first secure determination.
Essentially, the oldest trustworthy carbon date.
But the trouble is, carbon dating doesn't date an event or a monument. Carbon dating dates carbon.
And that can create problems. Imagine an archaeologist discovering charcoal beside an ancient monument, carbon date the charcoal and assume that is the date of the monument. That's at best lazy and at worst deliberately misleading, especially if you just pick the first date on every occasion. Those outlying dates could well have come from an occupation of the general area centuries before. Archaeologists rarely trust one date in isolation. They try to look for patterns, layers and context.
But the critics aren't completely wrong about one thing. Sometimes the carbon dates do appear to completely fail, and there's no better example than this than a medieval king. 2012, archaeologists would make a huge discovery beneath a council car park in Leicestershire.
They found Richard III, killed at Bosworth in 1485, buried quickly, lost for centuries and then found, except there was a problem: carbon dating.
Because when scientists tested the remains of Richard III, well, it didn't fit. We already knew he died in 1485, but these carbon dating results from those tests, well, they didn't match that date at all. And if it can go wrong here, well, what does that mean for the rest of carbon dates that have ever been tested before?
But here's where things get interesting, because carbon dating hadn't actually failed at all. Scientists had missed something. Richard III wasn't just a king, he was wealthy, really wealthy. Historical records suggest that Richard ate significant amounts of fish.
Particularly in later life, and strangely, well, fish in the marine environment can cause problems with carbon dating. You see, carbon dating works by measuring the amount of carbon absorbed from the atmosphere, but of course in a marine environment it doesn't do that at the same rate, the same level, which means of course that people eating a lot of seafood can often appear older with those carbon dating results. Scientists call this the marine reservoir effect.
History was helping explain carbon dating. You see, Richard III wasn't evidence carbon dating had failed. Richard III was evidence scientists had worked out why it looked wrong.
Now, the Richard III example wasn't the only time that we've got carbon dating wrong for whatever reason. Sometimes archaeologists revisit sites decades later and then completely change the timeline, which brings us nicely to this landscape. Now, the Richard III example gave us an insight. It told us that sometimes carbon dates can appear wrong, but scientists will learn from that and move on and adapt the process accordingly. But of course, then that raises the question of another criticism we hear all the time, especially on this channel: why did dates change?
Critics will often highlight this. Archaeologists publish one date, then years later the date changes, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries, and people become suspicious. My comment section is a complete mess.
Places like this landscape don't help. Might have better see it, but through there is Silbury Hill. Let's go take a look and explain why. Silbury Hill, one of Britain's most important monuments. 2,400, 500 BC, and people lived here long before this, north of this. Windmill Hill down to Avebury, all these places, and they feasted and they gathered and they built monuments around here like they're on steroids.
And that's where things become difficult.
You see, carbon dating doesn't usually give archaeologists this sort of one-time hit, this perfect date. It would always give us a range and sort of a fragment of a bigger story. Now, this is a rarity for me and probably for many people. Normally, I'd be about 2 or 3 feet underwater. This is normally here deep, but no, I'm going to savour this today because there is no water here. We've had a dry spring. So imagine excavating within this landscape here, and you find a sample you can carbon date, then another one and another one, and you get this range of dates. Well, at that point, you're not making this broad assumption that that was built then because we had a carbon date here or here. What actually happened here was one of the sort of early antiquarian tunnels that was bored into this, well, it collapsed during a shoring up process, and it exposed some grass seeds, and it allowed us to sort of build this picture using carbon dating of when it was built and when it was structured. It refined the dates. This is a great example.
Archaeologists refine the timeline. Critics see that and think, well, hang on, they changed the date, they got it wrong. But that's not what is happening. Imagine trying to understand a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. At first,
you only have 20 pieces, but later, maybe a decade later, you have 50 pieces. And then later on, maybe you have 500 pieces. The picture's building. Except sometimes better understanding, better methodology, it doesn't just refine dates here and there. What if it changes them dramatically? We need to head to Gough's Cave.
If changing dates can make people suspicious, well, Gough's Cave takes that problem to another level, because here, deep within these caves near Cheddar Gorge, archaeologists uncovered some of Britain's oldest human remains. People living here close to the edge of the last ice age, thousands of years ago, and carbon dating seemed to tell one story. Then years later, scientists looked again and the dates changed. Critics look at examples like this and think they've found proof that carbon dating doesn't work, but dating something nearly 15,000 years old is extremely difficult, because when you're dealing with material that old, tiny problems can become enormous problems. Material introduced after that burial, things archaeologists simply couldn't remove properly decades ago, and that's why things changed. Over time, samples that once suggested activity spread over much longer periods began to tighten, it sharpened, and the picture became clearer. Better science, better methods, and better answers. Which leaves us one final question. If carbon dating keeps improving, how do we know the entire system isn't fundamentally wrong at all? That answer begins with trees.
So for everything we've discussed so far, all good, but how do we know carbon dating works? If carbon dating kind of underpins archaeology, well, what exactly is it that underpins carbon dating itself?
The answer is trees. No archaeology, no ancient monuments, just trees.
So trees do something quite remarkable. We'll know that they grow a new ring each year. Wet years, dry years, a good season, a bad season, you name it.
Those changing conditions leave patterns behind. You can simply count backwards. Straight away you have a timeline. That's step one.
Scientists realise that this could be extremely useful as a science, a dating science. Not just one tree, that would only tell part of the story, but
enough ancient timber survives that scientists realise that those ring patterns could be linked together over vast periods of time, piece by piece, timber by timber. Find a piece of timber that has some identifiable tree rings and it will somewhere fit into a larger known database, dendrochronology. Archaeology now has something remarkable, a completely separate dating system, independent of carbon dating.
Okay, so I saw a fallen tree on the OS maps here, marked there, and I thought this tree would be a great example to show you this huge amount of rings in this ancient forest, but not quite as big as I anticipated. So we take a tree that we know the date of, verified by dendrochronology, and we compare it to carbon dating. And well, does it match? Yes, most of the time it does. And this is the point, that's the point that really is important to us, because well, dendrochronology then helped improve carbon dating.
Scientists discovered carbon levels in the atmosphere fluctuate over time. Radiocarbon years don't perfectly match calendar years. Tree rings revealed that. Calibration curves corrected it. And that matters hugely. Scientists weren't blindly trusting carbon dating. They were testing it, trying to catch it out, and after decades of scrutiny, it kept on agreeing.
For me, that's why carbon dating remains one of the single most useful tools within the archaeological weaponry they have available. Not because scientists just assumed it was working and just blindly trusted it, but moreover, they continue to try and break it. And every single time it passed that test and improved onwards and onwards. I've been Paul. I'm glad we cleared this up once and for all on this channel at least. I'll see you this time next week. Click subscribe.